Well, good morning. I'm Brian Huffling. I am one of the professors at Southern Evangelical Seminary, and thank you for coming to the Weird Talk on UFOs and aliens and all that kind of stuff. So, I have been interested in the night sky since I was a young kid, and a few years ago I got interested in reading about UFOs, almost accidentally. I just started reading some books on it. One of them was Hugh Ross's book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. And he references some other ufologists. Yes, that's a real word, ufologist, somebody who studies all things UFOs and aliens and that kind of thing. So I started reading that a couple years ago. I'm also a reserve chaplain in the Air Force. I've been in the Marine Corps, the Navy, and now I'm in the Air Force. I'm done. I'm not going anywhere else. I'm all good now where I am. And but I just finished a degree program with the Air Force, and I got them to agree to let me do my research project on UFOs and national security, which ended up being a really interesting time to do that because of all the stuff that's been coming out in the last few years, and we're going to discuss that a little bit. So why in the world would we have this weird UFO alien talk at a conference on Christian apologetics? Okay. Well, let me just say, first of all, at about 11:10, 11:15-ish, I'm going to try to be done with my talk so we can have Q&A, let you ask questions. I might not give you any answers, but I'm going to let you ask questions. And so if you have any questions, just write them down. We'll have a microphone going around at that time. So why are we having this talk, this kind of weird, odd topic at a Christian conference? I used to wonder that. Why are Christians interested in UFOs and that kind of thing? Well, for one thing, UFOs and aliens are seen to challenge Christianity. We were discussing this before the talk happened. People have this notion that if there are such things as aliens or anything else like that out in the universe, that it might pose a challenge to Christianity. And so one thing that we as Christian apologists want to do is try to defend the Christian faith. So we're going to look and see, are there any issues that come up with the idea of UFOs or aliens that might pose a question to Christianity. I'm going to be referring to a couple of ufologists, particularly here in this talk. One is by the name of Jacques Vallée. You guys ever heard of Jacques Vallée? How many of you have seen, what's that Spielberg movie? Close Encounters of the Third Kind? You guys seen that? You know the French guy, the scientist? His character is based on Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée is a French scientist. He's an astronomer and computer guy. And he's become the world-renowned ufologist. I'm going to be referring to him. He's not a Christian. He's an agnostic. But it's interesting that a lot of what he says is very similar to what we believe in the Christian circles about what we think these things probably are. And he says, faced with the new wave of experiences of UFO contact, our religions seem obsolete. Our idea of the church as a social entity working within rational structures is obviously challenged. So when I look at this and read these books, I don't hear a lot about this stuff coming out of the church. There's some things out there, and there's some people doing some things. But I think that one of our graduates, Marcia Montenegro from SES, she used to be a psychic. I think she was a channeler. She would be in contact with what they would call spirit guides, or we would call them demons. And she has a book out there called I think it's called The Paranormal Seduction of Our Children. Something like that, spellbound. And if you look at TV today, if you look at just our culture or media, what's going after our children and just us in general, there's a big seduction and pull toward the paranormal. What I'm going to try to argue from what these non-Christians are saying is that there is this interesting pull and connection between UFOs and all that and the paranormal. It's not just about other beings on Jupiter or another stellar system or whatever. Okay. He says, I propose that there is a spiritual control system for human consciousness, and that paranormal phenomena like UFOs are one of its manifestations. So what I'm going to be trying to argue in this talk is that the whole thing about UFOs and aliens is going to be one of the ways that I think that the devil and the demons and all that can try to sway people away from the truth of Christianity and God and the gospel, and do it in a way that doesn't really look like that's what's happening, but in fact it is. He says, what could a paranormal phenomena control? And I used to wonder, why do Christians think that UFOs and aliens are demonic or spiritual in that regard? Why in the world would a demon care to impersonate an alien? Well, I started reading people like Jacques Vallée and John Keel and different people like that, and they say things like this: control. He says, I suggest that it's human belief that is being controlled and conditioned. And I thought, well, that might be a good idea for if you want to get people in the battlefield of ideas to come off of the truth. Then one way to do that is to control their beliefs, right? So, and we see this, and if you look at UFO books like Urantia and different groups, the Raelians and cults and things, a lot, if not most, of what we're taught in these UFO, either by contactees who are supposed to be in contact with aliens and things, there is a decidedly explicit anti-Christian, not just anti-religious, but anti-Christian message. And so that is in keeping. This is what people who are not Christians are telling us. He says, this opening of the mind to a new set of symbols as reported by many witnesses is precisely what the various occult traditions try to achieve. So that's why we have these talks and these kind of these conferences and things about UFOs, because this is literally a spiritual issue. That doesn't seem like it, but it has a very real spiritual aspect to it. So he says, in a recent book on abduction, a Canadian researcher, let me just summarize this quote. If we look all across history, all across the world, as far back as we can go and as far around as we can go, cultures have had the same kind of experiences with UFOs, with abductions. It might not be aliens per se. If you look in Vallée's book, Passport to Magonia and Wonders in the Sky, he shows us that wherever we look in history and in human culture, we have the same kind of ideas of things flying around in the sky, abducting people. Some of it's very religious, very mythological. And so researchers and psychologists tell us that this is a normal part, normal in quotes, part of people's society. However, when he talks about spirituality, he doesn't mean angels and demons like we do. He says, when I speak of spiritual control systems, I don't mean entities with, we might call angels or demons. What I do mean is that mythology rules at a level of our social reality over which normal political and intellectual trends have no real power. So, Vallée is going to argue against the alien view. He's not going to argue for the spiritual view that Christians would. But he's going to have a very interesting argument against the alien view. But so we're going to look at that in a little bit later. Here's what we're going to look at today. One is just an overview of the history of ufology, especially as it relates to our culture here in the U.S. I mentioned I'm an Air Force chaplain, and I got to do my research project for a master's degree I just finished in August, actually, on the topic of UFOs and national security. You may have heard, ever since 2017, there was a breakout article in the New York Times. We're going to see some of the videos today. And there's been a lot of stuff coming out with Congress with UFOs. So I'm going to kind of explore what we're seeing in the culture. So what people are know about all over, if you go to Starbucks or the mall or whatever, people are normally going to be aware of these kind of things. So there's one interesting aspect of this, that it's not just a defensive way to handle our faith, but it's also a door to explain to people what these things really might be and how we can talk to people about Christ through this interesting door. So we're going to look at the current situation, some various views of the phenomena, and then what's the big deal? What's the significance? What can we take away, and why are we here again talking to us? And what should be our main takeaway? Real quick, though, let's get some terms down. You may have heard the term flying saucer. I mean the same thing by flying saucer, UFO, or UAP. So modern American ufology normally begins in June of 1947. We had our 75th anniversary this past June, when Kenneth Arnold in around Mount Rainier, Washington State, says he saw 9 what are described as disc-like things flying around. So they became known as flying saucers. Well, when Project Blue Book happened with the Air Force, the captain who ran that program, Captain Ruppelt, decided to name, because flying saucers became pejorative, he decided to call them UFOs or UFOs. And now that turns pejorative, so now the military calls them UAPs. All right, so unidentified aerial phenomena, or you might hear unidentified anomalous phenomena. All mean the same thing. Okay, brief history. Okay, Kenneth Arnold, he sees these 9 things flying around at what he ultimately thinks is around 1,700 miles an hour. Now, you'll remember we're just out of World War II. We're really flying propeller-type aircraft and not really fast aircraft compared to what he just saw. So that's June of 1947. Roswell happened either that month or the next month, same year, so all of it happening all at the same time. You familiar with Roswell? Okay, that's probably the biggest event that people think about, that in Area 51. So it's well known that something crashed around Roswell, New Mexico. Big debate as to what it was. The Air Force initially said disc. It was a disc. Okay, that's pretty interesting, right? So that caused a big commotion. If you believe the intel officer who showed up, Jesse Marcel, now remember the Air Force started, you might know when the Air Force started? Sorry? 47. Right, 47, September. So this is before the Air Force even was really a thing. This is the Army Air Corps. So Jesse Marcel was the intel officer who went out and investigated this, and he thought it was so weird he took some of it home to his kids to see, and he was showing it off, and he says he was told by the Air Force or the Army Air Corps to pose with pictures and just to say it was a weather balloon. So it went from disc to hours later a weather balloon. Well, back in the 90s, this wasn't really a big deal until about 78, because it was kind of hush-hush. They say it was weather balloon, no big deal. Well, back in 1978, some other authors started writing about it and comparing notes, and then it became a big issue. Well, back in the 90s, about 94 or so, the Air Force came out with another book saying that, well, it wasn't a weather balloon, it was a spy balloon or spying on the Russia or the USSR, seeing if they were detonating atomic weapons or not. It was Project Mogul, they said. So it depends on but something fell in Roswell, 1947. Of course, the conspiracy folks think it was aircraft and aliens and all that, taking Matt to Wright Air Force Base and all that kind of stuff. Air Force was formed in 1947 in September, so all was happening really quick. In the middle of all this, a general, one of the commanding generals of the Army Air Forces, puts together a letter. It's called a Twining letter. It looks like this, and you can't read that. Here's some of what it says, though. He says in this letter, this is a general, he says, the phenomenon reported is something real, not visionary or fictitious. Now, one reason I'm going through the history here is because a lot of folks say, well, UFOs are just seen by crazy people. There's nothing to it. That's not true. It doesn't mean that they're aliens from another planet, but the people are seeing things, and we have this interesting, rich history even in our own military, and because it's such a big deal now to make it kind of relevant. So it's real. Whatever they're seeing is real. It's not visionary or fictitious. There are objects probably approximating the size or shape of a disc of such appreciable size as to appear to be as large as a man-made aircraft. This is straight out of his letter. Due consideration should be given to things like natural phenomenon, domestic projects, foreign nation technology, that kind of thing. And he recommended a project set up to study UFOs. And that project, there were really 3 projects before Project Blue Book. One of them was Project Sign. So Project Sign started in 1948. It started with the classics. There were various classics. There were 3 classics. One in which actually an Air Force pilot died in the National Guard. He was from, I think it was from the Kentucky National Guard. and he died chasing an aircraft, chasing a UFO. Our pilots have reportedly actually shot at UFOs. It's interesting because we had our I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but we had a congressional hearing this past July, first congressional hearing in 50 years. And the two intel chiefs who were briefing the Congress were unaware that our folks have reportedly shot at UFOs. In fact, the other countries have as well. Peru, a Peruvian pilot back in the 70s, Iran has chased them. A lot of folks have chased UFOs around the world. So in the middle of all this, they make what's called the estimate of the situation. That is, just taking all the intel and trying to give what they think is going on. The estimate, they said, is that this is what the generals were saying, and the leaders saying they said is interplanetary spacecraft. That's what they're saying from our military. Higher-ups didn't like that. That got squashed. But the people who were running the intel operations said interplanetary spacecraft. Project Grudge came about in 1949, followed by a newer Project Grudge. And then Edward Ruppelt, who kind of phased out Project Grudge and phased in Project Blue Book, the main one that you probably are more aware of, said this: airline pilots, military pilots, generals, scientists, and dozens of other people were reporting UFOs, and in greater detail than in reports of the past. Radars, which were being built for air defense, began to pick up some very unusual targets, thus lending technical corroboration to the unsubstantiated claims of human observers. He says, as a result of the continuing accumulation of more impressive UFO reports, official interest stirred. Early in 1951, verbal orders came down from Major General Charles Cabell, then Director of Intelligence for Headquarters, U.S. Air Force, to make a study reviewing the UFO situation for Air Force Headquarters. And here we have Project Blue Book. Went from 1952 to there was a debate between December of 69 and January 1970, but right around there. And so the Air Force is studying UFOs. Now, what's going on in this time period, historical-wise? We're in the Red Scare, right? We're in the Soviet Scare, and all this is going on. So there's a lot of concern about that these UFOs really are just Soviet aircraft, maybe have been stolen technology from the German Nazis, because they were having some pretty impressive breakthroughs with technology themselves. That didn't last very long. So Grudge was changed in March of 52 to Blue Book. And there's a flap. You might know what a flap is in ufology. A flap is where you've got a flap. Really, in the general term, can be just a confusing situation. But in ufology, that means a bunch of sightings all at once over days or weeks or months. There was a flap in D.C. in 1952. It was one of the major flaps in the U.S. in D.C. Okay, people were seeing him from with military, like Andrews Air Force Base and Washington National Airport. We're seeing these UFOs on radar and visually. So they got the interest of the CIA. Well, so in 1953, the CIA intervened, and they wanted to have kind of a hot wash with the Air Force on this topic. Well, during all this, there were these letters coming out, like in 5 April, Air Force Letter 200-5 mandated UFO reporting from all intel officers around the Air Force, wherever they were. JNAP 146, 1943, stands for Joint Air Navy, Joint Army Navy, yes, Air Force Publication. Thank you. I'm tired. I've been traveling a lot. Thank you. And that mandated that you had to channel up your intel, but you cannot talk about it. And this came with thousands of dollars of fines, prison time, and it was pretty serious. Okay, here is what JNAP 146 looks like, and I've zoomed in so you can see this. So they have UFOs listed in their document, and they still are. And there's been an iteration of these JNAP documents. Okay, well, in 1953, the CIA had a meeting. It's now referred to as the Robertson Panel. And the Robertson Panel, they wanted to come together with the Air Force. You guys ever heard of J. Allen Hynek? He also was involved in Spielberg's movie. He's also one of the most famous ufologists. He was an astronomer for Ohio University. I've been corrected. I think it's the Ohio University. Is that right? And so he and Ruppelt and members from the CIA and different folks just met to investigate UFOs. And depending on who you listen to, the Air Force didn't really want them to be encroaching on their territory, so they didn't really give them the best cases, supposedly. All right? But the CIA came off saying, well, they probably aren't really interplanetary, but it might be a problem in clogging our channels if there really was a major event. So there is some national security issue, but it's probably more with the communication issues. And that got, it's argued by other historians that really isn't a big issue either. That really was just something the CIA wanted to say. But we have, at that point, supposedly, depending on who you ask, Project Blue Book became really a public relations front. And if you talk to Hynek, who's out there investigating, and Ruppelt and all these guys, Blue Book really was just a way for people to take in reports, but the real reporting was through JNAP 146 and those channels. But Blue Book went on until the end of the 60s, if not the beginning of 70s. Okay? There's various flaps in the 50s and 60s, a lot of UFOs being sighted, especially over nuclear bases. So you see today even that we see these folks over these carrier strike groups, and in various bases like Maelstrom in the 60s, you'll hear of a guy named Robert Salas, who was an intel officer in these silos at Maelstrom Air Force Base, which is a nuclear base. And they had about 20 of their nuclear missiles be taken offline at the exact moment they were reporting seeing UFOs. And it was not just one incident. This happened several times in there and other bases. I know a chaplain who worked at Minot, another nuclear base. He saw 3 instances of UFOs over their base, and they would routinely scramble jets and chase after them and all sorts of things like that. I meant to ask this earlier on, if you want to answer. How many of you have seen a UFO? How many of you know someone who saw a UFO? More hands go up. Yeah, statistically, you either have seen one or likely know someone who's seen one. I know 1, 2, 3, 4, a handful of people who've seen them. I've never seen one that I know of. But statistically, when you guys come to church, people have seen them in the room that you're in, or you know people who've seen them. Okay. So we have all these weird things going over the bases, with nuclear bases, nuclear missiles going offline, being non-functional. Okay. Then in the late 60s, the government gives University of Colorado about $500,000 or so to investigate what these things are. And if you look at the, it became known as the Condon Report or the Condon Committee, and it was divided as to people on the committee as to what they thought about this kind of stuff. The beginning summary of this 1,000-page report or so says, there's nothing to this, is what Condon said. But if you read the actual report, there's a lot in there that wasn't explained, like 25% wasn't explained. So there's still a lot of UFOs in the actual report. All right? A lot of other notable events. My favorite event, I was born in December of 1980, and my favorite event UFO-wise was December of 80 in Rendlesham Forest in the UK. And you may have heard this one. This is where we had these unexplained lights, and even people saying they saw this craft lower in land in this clearing in RAF Rendlesham Forest, or Bentwaters rather, and other bases around. And the deputy base commander and security forces saw these things and reported seeing them. And it was a really interesting case. And why these things are interesting is because I have another presentation that shows there's a lot of similarity between the kinds of evidence that we give for the resurrection that people give for seeing things like UFOs. Like, for one thing, is why would a deputy commander at a one of the most strategic bases, a nuclear base, make this up. It's not good for his career, right? You don't want to do that, okay? But the way we argue for the resurrection, eyewitness testimony, multiple eyewitness testimony, even the objections and responses are very similar. You ever heard of the Phoenix Lights? 1997 march over Phoenix. There was a huge craft that went over Phoenix. Hundreds of, if not thousands of people saw it. The governor at the time saw it. We've had several presidents see UFOs. Carter, Reagan said they saw UFOs. And then we get now into the modern time with 2004 with these Navy. Who's never seen the Navy videos? You've never seen them? Okay, well, here you go.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
So those videos were taken by pilots, and it was leaked. And there were some articles that came out in the New York Times, 2017, and the Pentagon came out and verified these are actually real videos from our actual military aircraft. So there was a lot of stuff going on. And then back in 2007 or so, there's all these programs of the Pentagon studying things like UFOs or those kinds of things, the Advanced Aerial or Aviation Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. Article came out in 2017. As you saw in the video, in 2020, in August, the Navy started the UAP, or Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, to study these things. And then just last June, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence put together, because of Donald Trump, a preliminary assessment to Congress, in which they said that there are all these UFOs that we know there's about 144 that we've studied since 2004. We don't know what they are. And it's only about a 9-page document. You can go online and look at it. Just look up the UFO Preliminary Report 2021. Or I have a blog article on my website. It's just brianhuffling.com. I'm very creative. And I have my last blog article is on this. It has links to all that kind of stuff in there. So that was last June. And then this past July, a few months ago, we had the first congressional hearing in 50 years on UFOs. And there were 2 hearings. There was a public hearing that you can go watch, and then there was a behind-the-scenes secret hearing in the afternoon. So this is all going on right now. It's all kind of breaking through, and it's people are talking about it. It's exciting. It's weird. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that's coming out in the literature and books and that kind of thing. So that's why it can be used as actually an apologetic or an evangelistic tool. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. That's kind of the history, and where this is very, very brief. I'm going to give you some other books if you're interested to go look at. You can just spend forever reading about this kind of stuff. I'm just touching the tip of the ice cube. Okay, so this is just really, really, really brief. This is part of the preliminary assessment. You can go online and read this. This also says here where it says 144 reports of UFOs. They don't know what they are. They still don't know what these things are. They just showed these videos in the congressional hearing in July. They still don't know what they are. Okay. So what are they? Where are some of the facts? So we take all this weird stuff. What can we distill from all this? What can we know and call kind of bedrock facts? Well, contrary to what many people believe, it's not just people who are uneducated out in the middle of nowhere getting drunk and high seeing UFOs. All right? People are seeing UFOs, and they have been for years, centuries, all around the world. Doesn't matter what your race is, your religion, your political economic status, doesn't matter. People are seeing UFOs. Now, don't equate the word UFO with spaceship. All that means is there's something flying around, they don't know what it is, by definition. Okay. Also, these things, whatever they are, can go unbelievably fast, thousands of miles an hour, perform 90-degree and 180-degree turns without slowing down, vanish, go in or out of existence seemingly from nowhere to nothing, change shape, change color, have no sound, they make no sonic boom, go through different kinds of space, air, water, even physical things, like they're not even there. Okay? You know, all this weird stuff. This is just part of the facts. People are seeing, experiencing apparent abductions with some type of beings. And this has been going on this is not new, it's been going on for hundreds of years. We see this with other folklore, mythology, with the little people. You guys ever heard of the fairies and elves? I didn't know until about 2 years ago. I was an apologist and Bible teacher and all that kind of stuff. That was a real thing. I didn't know that. I've taught world religions and Hinduism, but not that kind of stuff. Fairies and elves, really? Gnomes? Those are thought to be real things. And there's a lot of similarities between the kinds of experiences people have with those beings or whatever as they do with aliens. So Valet and John Keel, you ever heard of the Mop-In prophecies? He wrote the Mop-In prophecies. John Keel is one of the leading paranormal experts, I guess, of the 20th century and 21st century. And they're saying that there's a lot of similarities between this UFO stuff and all of other folklore, mythology, and religion. Okay. There's a civilian UFO research group called Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. Anybody heard of that? Okay. There is a director, Joe Jordan. He used to be, I'm guessing still is, in South Korea. Through all the studies of UFOs and stuff, he became a Christian. Through whatever, I forgot his testimony, he became a Christian through his studies and seeking out Christ. His girlfriend led him to Christ. And he found something very weird in his studies of abductions and UFOs and stuff. He'd always been taught that when it comes to abductions, they can't be stopped. You're just a helpless victim. Except that when people call on the name of Christ, they stop. So he started asking people in other areas of MUFON, have you guys ever heard of people calling on the name of Christ and these things stopping? And they said, yeah, but we can't talk about it because it's religious. So you go study it. You publish on it. So he has been. So we're going to discuss that too. He has an interesting book called Piercing the Cosmic Veil. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night. And a lot of these instances of people having these experiences or abductions are very, very evil and dark. So somebody wrote me recently, I just read my blog article on this, and they sent me his book about the publish. And he said, I'm so glad someone's done it. I don't want to do it anymore. I said, why? He said, because it's so dark. It's so evil. A lot of these people's experiences are horrific. They're terrorizing. His book is very aptly named as The Terror by Night. People are being terrorized by these things. But this is not just a few people over there in the sanitarium saying this. These are people, normal people, professional people having these kind of experiences. Children have these experiences, older people, and everybody in between. These beings come in different sizes, shapes, and appearances. And then this activity is often associated with other paranormal or poltergeist activity. Poltergeist activity is like things that can't be explained. Lights turning on, doors opening, doorbell ringing, hearing babies crying when there's no baby. Weird, crazy stuff, right? So UFO stuff, if you've seen Close Encounters, remember the little boy gets abducted in the scene? His toys turn on, things start moving. That's very similar to what you see with poltergeist stuff, haunted house stuff. The UFO stuff is very connected with that. Very weird, evil stuff. Many cultic groups come out of the UFO movement with teachings similar to New Age teachings and deny core Christian teaching like the divinity or even the existence of Christ. But especially his in fact, a lot of them will teach that he was an alien himself or that he was raised to life by aliens. And there's a lot of UFO cults. Bigfoot is part of all this too. People will say that Bigfoot and aliens are intertwined. There's a lot of this all intertwined somehow. So what are the various views? I'm going to try to wrap up so we can start taking some questions. What are the various views? Well, one is just the skeptical terrestrial view, which is there's nothing going on. You're looking at Venus, you're looking at, and about 95% are. About 95% of reports are naturally explained. Venus, an F-117, various weather or whatever, okay? Then there's the alien view, or what's called the extraterrestrial view, the ETH, the interdimensional view, we're going to get to that, the psychological view, and then the spiritual view that I'm going to argue for. The skeptical view is just that if people think it's Venus or weather, and people do think and report Venus and these different things as UFOs or other conventional aircraft. Now, in these assessments, our government is saying it's not ours, and we don't know of anybody else who has them. And whatever they are, they would have to have been in existence at least by the 30s or 40s, not just 2021 or 2022. It's been going on for a long time. But our government is saying it's not ours, and we don't know of anybody else like China or anybody else who has these kind of things. The alien view is normally the default view. Okay, well, if there's a UFO, it's got to be aliens. Okay, that's normally just kind of the default view. Well, are they? Are they extraterrestrial? Valet says the real question is, does the spacecraft hypothesis explain to our own satisfaction the facts of the UFO phenomenon? He says no, a definite and resounding no. The soft sightings, John Keel says, being more numerous, that's just like seeing lights and things, comprise the real phenomena and deserve the most study. The scope, frequency, and distribution of the sightings make the popular extraterrestrial view untenable. So real quick, if you get there's a book called, I think this is Revelations or Confrontations by Jacques Vallée. He argues these five different, in the back of the book, it's a paper he gave at a conference. It's just an appendix, but the appendix is worth the price of it. It was like $10 on Kindle. He says the amount of times that we see, there's only about maybe at most 10% of all the reports that are given, only make about 10% probably what's really happening. So if there's really 100 sightings, about 10 of them are reported, maybe, at the most. He says given all the factors, it could be in the millions. Well, given, and normally this is a typical template of what they do. They come in, they check people out, check soil out. Why would they need to come millions of times to do that? It doesn't make any sense if they're just aliens. The physiology, if you look at it from just a purely naturalistic evolutionary view, these aliens, there's different kinds. There's kind that look like the green Martian things, the big head, eyes, and 2 arms and legs. The chances of, this is Vallée saying, it's not a Christian, saying that evolution giving us another anatomical creature like that is 0. And you've also got all these other species of aliens, reptilian, hairy ones, Nordic-looking ones like blonde hair, good-looking people, the green ones or the gray ones. But the possibility or chances of that happening naturally are 0. These are from natural scientists saying this, not Christians. The number of alleged abductions doesn't make any sense. Why do they need to abduct so many people for these rude and crude scientific experiences that our own scientists can do a better job at than what these aliens are supposed to do in the history? A lot of the modern books and stuff don't take into account the overall history, whether it's just the number of sightings, the kind of sightings, the religious nature of it, or just the teachings, the whole ball of wax. It shouldn't start at 1947 where people now are just saying they're coming to tell us not to blow ourselves up. Okay, There were other sightings in flats before then, even in the U.S., the 1890s, or airship flaps here, all over the U.S. So we really can't start with just 1947. Look at the big picture. If you look at the big picture, then it doesn't bode well for the alien view. Okay, his view, Jacques Vallée, is the interdimensional view. Now he doesn't give three more. I'm going to give. One is the interstellar travel problem. I rely on people like Hugh Ross for this. And that he says that it's just impossible to travel that far, that fast, with that much energy it would take to get here. Space isn't empty. If you hit a little piece of dust, you're done. Okay, the amount of time it would take, not possible. Wormholes crush you. So go read Ross on that. But he argues that this kind of travel is not possible. The non-physical and the occultic nature does not bode well for the alien view, because they do things that should not be physically possible. It also doesn't account for the occultic and anti-Christian aspects to it. But his view is that the UFO phenomena does not give evidence of being extraterrestrial. Instead, it appears to be interdimensional and to manipulate space-time. What he's saying here is that they're not from out there, they're from here. They can just go through different space-time dimensions and just appear where they want to. And he thinks that explains how they can do the things that they can do. Ross deals with this in his book, Lights in the Sky. It's an interesting theory, somewhat ad hoc possibly, meaning that it's just kind of postulated to make up for the data. Is it even possible? This is very theoretical and conjectural. It does seem to have less consistency, I think, in explanatory power and scope. Explanatory power is how well it explains the data. Scope is how much of the data explains. I think the demonic view explains more and better. And according to Ross, this view really is irrelevant, because if you're in one dimension, you can't get out of that dimension. You're just stuck in it. Okay. So I like Vallée, though, because he's arguing against the alien view, which I think is good, because I think he has good arguments. And he's saying things that are very, very similar, like Keel, to our view. They're really close, and they're saying things that are very, very true, that are almost Christian, but not quite. The psychological view, some people say it's merely just in your head, and there may be some of that. So there's not one answer. That's what these reports from Congress are saying too. There's not one answer all the time. Okay, so sometimes can it be just in your head? Possibly, but there's also physical effects, like the resurrection. Well, it wasn't in their heads, the disciples' heads. There's physical evidence for it. Okay. Multiple witnesses. What about Keel's view and Hynek's view? They say they're not ultimately physical, that they have a kind of paraphysical or psychic reality about them. And they can manifest. What's that sound like? Angels, right? They can manifest. They can manifest physically and do things. Like poltergeists. It's interesting, these people are not Christians, and they connect the paranormal and poltergeist type stuff to these UFO and alien type experiences. Well, those are good points. He says the real problem here is, what had these people seen? The general behavior of the objects clearly indicated that they were paraphysical, that is not composed of solid matter. Okay. What about this view? There's some good points, the similarities that we just mentioned, but it doesn't explain everything. I think the Christian view that these are demonic explains the data better. Arguments for the view I'm trying to give. This explains the violations of physics, that these are demonic spiritual beings trying to control our worldview and our thoughts and beliefs, saying that Christ isn't really God, that the scriptures are full of errors, and those kind of things. It explains the violation of physics. It explains the similarities with other man-made cult groups or occult faiths. It explains the anti-Christian teachings. It explains why, like Joe Jordan says, the abductions stop. The only way to stop them is by using the name of Christ. And he has hundreds of testimonies. In fact, is one book I can't read at night. I read this stuff when I go to bed. It's pitch black at night, and I can't read that one. It's just scary. So I'll read these things, and I'm okay with like his lights over here. We start talking about demons and stuff. I start to freak out in the middle of the night reading in pitch black. Not the best time to read that stuff. But I wrote him, I had to stop reading your book. His website is piercingthecosmicveil.com or ce4research.com. And his book and website has lots of interesting testimonies from people who have had these experiences and call on the name of Christ to make him stop. It also explains the overall spiritual nature of these events. Okay. So what's the significance? If the phenomena are related to demonic activity, it's likely the case that people are opening themselves up to it somehow, that you're opening yourself up to it. Not always. And there's also been cases where children have had these experiences. Well, how do they open the door? Well, it's also been shown that people in the family have opened the door for the children or people that you don't even know about. If that's the case, then we need to be aware of such issues and strive to guard against them and be entrenched in solid doctrine. Here is a warning by John Keel. A large part of available UFO literature is closely linked with mysticism and the metaphysical. It deals with subjects like mental telepathy, automatic writings where you're pretty much being controlled by a spirit supposedly, and invisible entities, as well as phenomena like poltergeist manifestations and possession. Many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demoniac possession. Again, it's not a Christian. And psychic phenomena, which has long been known to theologians and parapsychologists. And last thing, dabbling with UFOs can be as dangerous as dabbling with black magic. The phenomena preys upon the neurotic, the gullible, and the immature. Paranoid schizophrenia, demonomania, and even suicide can result, and has resulted in a number of cases. Therefore, a mild curiosity about UFOs can turn into a destructive obsession. For this reason, I strongly recommend, he's writing books on this. He's trying to, he makes a living doing this kind of stuff. He says, for this reason, I strongly recommend that parents forbid their children from becoming involved. School teachers and other adults should not encourage teenagers to take an interest in the subject. Non-Christian. Very serious warning. Here are some sources if you want. There's a lot of sources if you have specific questions about it. I can lead you to other sources as well. Here are some main ones you might want to look at. Are there any questions? Yes. We have a microphone coming around somewhere, I believe.
Hi, I'm Joe Shipley. I have a couple of, thanks for this, by the way.
Your name is Joe, you said?
Joe.
A lot of Joes, and my first name was Joe, and Joe Jordan, and other guys writing on this is Joe. Got to be a Joe in this field, I guess.
I guess so. A couple questions, or actually one question, but sort of multiple parts. What was the sort of the thesis of your degree that you just completed? Where did you complete it? And if it was government sponsored, how was it received?
So it was I'm a major at every rank in the Air Force, until you get colonel, you got to take a program of study. And so it was the degree was, it's a mouthful, it's a master's in military operational art and science with a concentration in joint warfare. So it sounds really cool. They just happened to let me, I just kind of said, I gave them a different topic. I said, well, what I really want to do is UFOs. The actual topic was, are UAPs a threat to national security? Like, what are these things? Are they really a threat? Because they're flying around in our areas, in our bases, in our controlled areas. We can't control them. They're over here, they're over there, they can do whatever they want to. So is that a threat? They can shut down missiles, it seems like, and then we just can't stop them. So it seemed like they could possibly be a threat to national security, depending on what they are, right? It was through Air University, which is the Air Force's school, and it was interesting to the students, and the teachers thought it was interesting, and she pretty much agreed with what I was trying to say. She didn't think it was that much of a threat as I was saying it could be. She wanted to say it was just a potential threat, which that's all I was trying to say too, is it was just a potential threat. So it just got done, so I'm not sure how it's going to be received yet. It's going to be available for mockery or whatever else they're going to do with it, so we'll see what they say. Did I answer your question?
Partly. Did you also get into your opinion that it is
demonic? So I gave the various views, and I gave the pros and cons of each view. So I didn't argue for that strongly. I gave this is a view. I said a strong part of it is it does seem to give the evidence. It explains the evidence, but it does require this kind of background view of holding to Christianity and holding to spiritual views, and it makes you have to leave more stuff, which doesn't make it wrong, but it requires this other belief system. Yeah.
Okay, on the one hand, you seem to be saying that many of the sightings seem to be by fairly reliable people, like the pilots and folks at the military bases. On the other hand, in your summary, you seem to be saying that that these are unstable people or people who are vulnerable to...
The Keel quote?
Yeah,
Okay.
perhaps that. Yeah, that seems to be a contradiction because, you know, if we say that the people who are otherwise seem to be sane, you know, are seeing it, well, that's one thing, whereas your crazy aunt is another thing, you know.
Right.
So, I guess that seemed like a contradiction.
Okay, so it's everybody. So people who are, what Keel is saying is that people who are naturally prone to obsession and that kind of thing, it can become worse for them. Or people can really have psychological issues that lead them into this kind of area. Or you can take a very sane person who's a pilot and they can go crazy. And that's happened as well too. But it has happened with every walk of life, scientists, professionals, pilots. Leslie Keene has a good book about generals, pilots, and politicians going on the record. I forgot the exact name. But it's everybody. There's a spectrum. There's professionals, military experts, and then everyone else. But anybody can have that proclivity to neuroticism or psychological obsession. He's saying if you start going down that road, whether you are over here or over there, it can become a problem.
Or demonic attack.
Right, yeah. So don't open yourself up to those kind of things because that'll just draw you in more. Does that answer your question? Okay.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
So do you or don't you believe in UFOs?
I do.
Okay. If I said the word TR3B to you, what would you say to me?
I'll probably say, what's that?
So a TR3B is evidence of, I believe it's the Navy, has created a triangle shape, what we would call a UFO.
Okay.
It exists. There's evidence of it.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out of the classified world. And so that is evidence that we have that technology. The question goes to then where did we find that technology? So if I said the words Gerald Lighting in his letter from 1954 from Muroc base, where Eisenhower met what was then called a gray, and he illuminated in his letter that meeting took place and that Eisenhower signed what was called the 1954 Gradia Treaty with the Grays. Where do you stand on that?
So if you know what the Greys are, that's a species of alien, that one of the main species of aliens.
There's about 27, I believe.
Yeah, there's a bunch. I've read and studied these different encounters and meetings with the presidents. I'm not an expert on all the president stuff.
Yeah, 2 meetings.
Yeah. I would naturally be skeptical of that.
Even though it's written in evidence?
Yeah, because it depends on where it comes from, and I would have to look at it myself. I mean, I'm not gonna, I would want to look at it and study
Okay.
it. Because there's a lot of people who have these meetings, and the people who have written, and the way the meetings come about, or who wrote, like who wrote it, who's supposed to have written about the meeting.
His name is Gerald Light, and in attendance to that meeting from 1954, April 16th, and it's a formal government document.
Mm-hmm.
You put up there a formal government document as
Is it part of MJ-12? There's a lot of government documents
So,
like MJ-12.
Okay, but it comes out of the classified arena, and in it, it had, so it's dated April 16th, 1954, and it has Meade Lionel, director of the Borderlands Sciences Research Association. It has 2 other individuals named specifically. So based on evidence, if you use evidence and classified documents that have gotten released, and you've shown one.
Mhm.
Gerald Light wrote a document dated April 16th, 1954, that specifically states, and it's a formal evidence, of the meeting between Eisenhower and the Greys on a spaceship for 45 minutes in Morocco at the base, and he highlighted who was there, and that they saw 5 different aircraft types, shapes and sizes given to them by the Ethians, which is another alien source. So how do you then deny the evidence of that? And then how do you, if you do your research and look at TR-3B, you're going to discover that we have that technology that was given to us, and it does exist, and although the military may say it doesn't, we're now seeing it. So
I would
So-
first of all have
so
to
I'm
just
gonna-
look at it myself to figure out what the evidence
Absolutely.
was.
So
And it would
the
be great to look at. I'd love to.
the other side of this conversation is there's a difference between the question, did God create other beings? He doesn't specifically say it, but the
Right.
Bible does talk about the Anunnaki. The Bible does talk about reptilians. The Bible does talk about other beings. Because we're not taught it doesn't mean they're not there.
Right.
So the other beings refer to God as God. There is one God.
Yeah.
They call him the creator source. So the difference between the demonic, of which I've experienced demonic in my life, there's a difference between occult and demonic and in our world, an alien to
Yeah.
us, alien. So the blonde-haired,
Yeah.
blue-eyed are Palladians, but demonic actually exists. I've lived that. And when you, as a Christian, delve into the satanic world of occult, which is not alien unless you're dealing with what they call the reptilians. And the reptilians are evil. They are of Satan. And the reptilians showed up as a snake or a reptile talking to Eve, of which we as a Christian group don't ever talk about. We just accept that a snake is talking to a human, but no one ever explains that to us, right? Unless you start doing your own research. So I guess I'd say to you, go look up TRB-3B.
Yeah.
And the United States Space Force was set up by Trump for a reason. Do you know the purpose? Did you ever research that?
The QRTB thing you're talking about?
No,
I'm not
the
familiar with
the United States Space Force. Trump stood up the United States
Right,
Space
right.
Force. So what's its purpose? Right, you're in the Air Force.
Well, my understanding was that we have a specified branch just for that specific mission
And what's its mission?
to handle issues in space.
Do you know
like
that their patch
missiles and
has a
satellite.
UFO on it?
I'm sorry? Their patch?
Their patch has a UFO. Matter of fact, they have multiple patches within their units, and they all have UFOs on it. So I would suggest there's more research to be done on this.
Yeah, there's a lot of, appreciate that. And there are multiple instances of various presidents, like Eisenhower and different people who have sat down, so we have to look at the evidence and see what the pros and cons are on both sides. Regarding the issue of, well, did God create other beings, that wouldn't, because that's been a question as well brought up in this room, is that it wouldn't disprove Christianity, but it would raise questions, but we don't have any positive evidence that that's happened, so it's not a problem. But even if God did create other beings, it wouldn't disprove God or Christianity. I think that needs to be clear as well. Was there a question over here? Yeah.
So I'm watching the CNN video, and my background is I'm an investigator. I see evidence of something's flying that's unexplainable, and it's hard to use the demonic or the spiritual argument to argue against the fact that these may or may not be extraterrestrial. So could you go through that argument with me, how you could use your point of view to argue against such evidence?
That is physical?
Yeah.
Okay, so again, I'm not saying every single instance is a demon. There may be instances like these things over here. We do have things, and the Air Force actually said what you're saying probably is a UFO. There have been anti or counter-intelligent operations to say what you're saying probably is a UFO, because they wanted to protect their classified information. So they will use UFOs to cover up our actual technology. So sometimes it might be our technology, but sometimes it's probably not. And again, this has to go back way before we even had this kind of technology. If the technology can do things that can break laws of physics, and we have no explanation to it, then and we're saying it's not ours, then that might be an argument for it not being physical. And these other researchers like Valet and Hynek, who are working with the Air Force, are saying that it's not alien or it's not physical because of the characteristics, like being able to do a 90-degree turn at 1,000 miles an hour, those kind of things. I have more time?
So, huge X-Files fan here. And also, Dark Skies also referenced the Eisenhower meeting. But in any case, I think one of the first abduction reports was Betty and Barney Hill back in the 50s.
Yeah.
What are your feelings on the abduction phenomenon? Is that a spiritual thing? Do you feel like it maybe a psychological? What are your impressions on?
It depends on the
abduction?
case, I think. Some could be psychological, and then some could be demonic, because we do have instances of people having these kind of experiences that seem to be very real. A lot of times, or sometimes they are abducted, but they don't leave the area. So someone might go into a trance and say, "Well, I was taken off." No, you're sitting right there. So that could have been in the mind. And then some people say that they were actually taken somewhere, or they walked through a wall, or walked through the spaceship, or whatever. I mean, there are clear demonic characteristics of some of these events. So, for example, the one I look at that's interesting is the Travis Walton one, which has more people who are witnesses, because no one really saw Betty and Barney. It was just their own experience. I'm not saying it didn't have it. It just depends on the kind of evidence we can marshal for each specific case. Am I getting at your answer? I'm kind of out of time. Am I getting at your answer at all? Question. We can talk more afterwards if you want to. And I'd like to hear more about what you have to say about the reference to look at as well. Well, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. I hope it was as weird as you were hoping it was going to be.